and welcome to the WonderCon panel on rom-coms. Super, super excited to chat about it. My name is Lily Herman. I am a culture writer at Bustle, and I'm also the co-host of the Bad Bitch Book Club's Friends to Lovers podcast, all about romances and what we can take away from them and put them in our own lives. Super excited to have so many great panelists here. I'd love, before we get started with questions, just for each of you to go through and introduce yourselves. So if anyone wants to kick things off, feel free.
Okay, I will. I'm Lauren. I am one half of the writing duo, Christina Lauren. So I'm going to be representing the two of us today. Hopefully I will make her proud. And we are authors of the romantic comedies such as The Unhoneymooners and Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating. We have a number of books, but yeah, we write together.
Amazing. Who wants to go next?
I will. I'm Alisha Rai. My latest series is Modern Love, and this is the latest book that came out in it, First Comes Light. And yeah, it's just about a trio sort of tech entrepreneur roommates. And the last one, Gia, she's an influencer, gets catfished, and then it turns into a happily ever after, as they usually don't, but do it.
Love to see it.
I'll go. I'm author Abby Jimenez, and I've written the Friend Zone, the Happy Ever After playlist, and Life's Too Short. This comes out April 6th. And I hail from Minnesota. So
a very cold fun fact.
Yeah, 41 degrees today, so it's heat wave.
Hi, I am Rachel Lynn Solomon. I am the author of several YA novels, and my first adult romantic comedy, The X Talk, came out last month, and it is a romantic comedy set in the world of public radio and about two people who pose as exes to host a new show about dating. And of course, they happen to fall in love along the way.
And I guess that makes me last, but hopefully not least. I'm Rosie Danan, and I am the author of The Roommate. I love when the book comes up. And the upcoming The Intimacy Experiment, which is a companion novel that also comes out on April 6th. So good day to go to a bookstore, maybe.
Amazing. Awesome. So I'm super excited to chat. And I think for my first question here, because we're talking all about rom-coms, I found that the term rom-com in publishing, in TV and film is just being thrown around a lot and is kind of used interchangeably with many other things, including it seems to be sort of this weird term that people are using to just describe romance as a genre at large, which isn't necessarily the case. So, so first and foremost, what makes something a rom-com to you, each of you? And do you think that there's, is there a particular arc or certain beats that you feel like a book needs to hit for it to be an official rom-com? Anyone can start us off here.
It just needs to be funny.
Yeah.
I think romance comes in so many different shapes, and I think that's great. Like some romance is very sincere and earnest, and some romance is darker and more twisty. And I think a rom-com needs to make you laugh. And I don't just mean the exhale through the nose, laugh, I mean, I want a belly laugh. And I just finished recently The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon, and I was DMing her as I was reading because I was cackling. And I think that that's what you want, is you want those moments where you're just bursting out laughing and the person next to you is like, what are you reading? And so that's for me what a rom-com is actual lulz.
I agree with that. I think for me, it's also something to do with relatability, either, with either or both characters. And I think that's sort of the beauty of the old 90s rom-coms for me. I'm never gonna rescue someone and then they're gonna go into a coma and I'm gonna pretend to be their fiance. But something about Sandra Bullock is very relatable. I watched that movie and I'm like, yeah, that seems rational, all of this, So I think no matter how far-fetched the idea is or how, even if it gets on the silly side or something like that, there is something in it that you're like, oh yeah, that could be me. But that is something that I relate to, and that's why I'm finding this funny.
I love it. Yeah.
And they have to end up together. It has to have a happy ever after. It's not a rom-com.
Oh, for sure. That, I mean, that's like not even up for debate, right? I've read so many books that have been labeled rom-coms and they don't end up together, and you just feel completely cheated.
Yeah.
But I would also add that I think there should be, at least for me, some kind of humor or comedic tension baked into the premise of the book, where you read that and you're like, oh my God, I cannot wait to see all of the scheming and the hijinks that ensue. You can just kind of imagine all of that unfolding just from the premise of the book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for all of you, do you like when you're plotting your books, do you start with thinking about the hijinks or kind of these aspects of a rom-com? Do you kind of write all the way through? I know there's always sort of this plotter or pantser question that comes up, particularly in romance, since there really is a spectrum. But yeah, what does it look like for you all as authors when you're plotting out specifically a rom-com and what that's going to look like?
For me, when I am writing it, the comedy always comes from the characters, not so much like the circumstances that I put them in. It's how they experience the things that are happening to them. They experience it through a sarcastic lens or a funny lens. So that's where the comedy comes from in my books.
I would say I'm actually, at least in the case of The Roommate, I was kind of the opposite of that. It, like, the premise kind of came to me initially was, if you found out your roommate was a porn star, like, what would any of us do? You'd wait until they left the house and you would Google them. And I just loved this idea of said porn star then walking in and being like, oh, what's going on here? And how that's like awkward and like, but then could turn sexy. And so that was the first scene that came to me when I was thinking about plotting this book. And I think it really set the tone for everything else that happens in the book. And I wouldn't say that like Clara, who's the heroine, is fun, like would consider herself funny, like outside of the events of the book, but it's the comedy that comes about when she's put into these situations that make her uncomfortable, but at the same time, like challenge her to think about herself and other people differently.
I had a really similar experience to Rosie in that a scene that I thought and hoped would be funny came to me very early on in the X-Talk, where two people are posing not as a boyfriend and girlfriend, but they're pretending that they dated in the past. So at one point they are kind of called out and their boss sends them away for a weekend. And he's like, you guys need to learn everything about each other. I want you to know how the other person, spits into the sink when they're brushing their teeth. And I was just like, that is going to be incredibly fun to write, just these two people forced together over a weekend. And obviously, the sexual tension that would arise from that. So a lot of the book came about from visualizing that scene and how to get to that point. So yeah, a lot of the rom-com setups and scenarios came from the very beginning.
You can also kind of park on the downhill there too, like setting yourself up with a premise that's going to be funny. I think we've had situations where we go into it planning to be funny and the characters' voices just aren't funny. And so in our edits, it's like, make more funny. Like we leave ourselves notes like this has to be funnier, but you don't know necessarily how to do that. And so I think, well, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but there are just some premises that lend themselves better to comedy. And sometimes it's really hard to insert comedy into a certain situation that's just like not meant to be funny. So
I think hijinks is a good word.
mm-hmm.
That's because you sort of want to get it set up, even if they're not like out of this world hijinks.
Totally.
Some kind of shenanigans got to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, I always find it interesting how different authors kind of define the hijinks very differently, or what they, there can be stuff that can seem very just high key a lot, and then there are the hijinks that are much more understated but are funny again in a both are funny but in a different way. At least how I look at it. Yeah. So the other thing I found really interesting is I feel like romance in general is at a really fascinating time. There was already been in recent years a real renaissance of the romance genre in general, and not to say that it didn't exist, before or anything, but it feels like we've kind of turned a leaf. It turned over a new leaf, and also obviously, I feel like no romance panel is complete without talking about Bridgerton and the utter, phenomenon that Bridgerton has become. But Bridgerton obviously has its drama, it's soapy and all of that. But why do you think rom-coms in particular have seen such a renaissance in recent years? And also, how do you think the pandemic in particular has sort of helped along that kind of explosion for the genre that we're seeing?
rom-coms are safe. You know that you can watch a rom-com or, watch or read a rom-com, and that even if there's going to be depth or difficult storylines or, things that are going to tug at your heartstrings, at the end, you're going to come out whole. So I think it's a very safe genre right now, especially with everything that's going on. You'll be okay at the end.
I think too, like, not to get like too heavy on a rom-com panel, but one of the things I was researching when I was writing the intimacy experiment, because it very much deals with like modern connection, was that sociologically this is like the loneliest period that we've ever been in, and that was before the pandemic. Just that like the rise of people like moving to the cities and away from their hometowns and away from their traditional community units. We just collectively are yearning for connection in a different way, and then you add on a global pandemic, and I think loneliness, and I don't think that's such a bad thing. Like I think it seems like people don't want to necessarily always say like, oh, I'm feeling lonely, but I think that's a really human thing. And romance works as a nice anecdote there, because it is about finding people that understand you, that accept you, and obviously like ultimately will love you. And I think that's really beautiful and something that has always, drawn me to the genre.
Yeah, I feel in some ways like we as a culture prioritize stories about pain and struggle as being sort of more culturally important or more literary. And, it drives me nuts, because I think like stories about happiness are just as important and can be just as profound. So one of my lifelong goals in being a romance writer is to dispel the notion that stories of happiness aren't important. And I think romance owns that space in a lot of ways. That's something that we take on by definition, because we have this contract with our readers that we are going to give you a happily ever after. And so we are the genre of hope. And I think there's something really powerful about being able to occupy that space as a job. We take it very seriously.
Also, we are the genre of horniness. And I think
yes,
that is
absolutely.
Also really important coming out of the pandemic.
100%.
People are horny and we are here to help.
We are here for you.
I think about, I have a 21-year-old sister, and she was always very like, she never wanted to read a romance, and partially maybe that's my fault because she wanted to get away from me. But also she was just very like, she loved the sad stories. She liked the ones that ended, kind of miserably. And she's always been kind of, like that kind of kid. And then last week she called me and she's like, I watched all of Bridgerton. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, you've been watching it this time? And she's like, oh, no, I watched it all this weekend. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, what else can I watch? And I said, well, Outlander. And like the next day she called me. She's like, I watched all of Outlander. What else?
Oh, welcome, little petal.
I was like, well, why don't we start going to like, because there's not a lot of period Regency like stuff or other period stuff I can tell you. So I was like, maybe we should start moving into rom-coms now. And so I think there is like a very low barrier of entry, and we do have this whole generation now growing up kind of in quarantine and isolation. I mean, she's gone through now 2 years of college by Zoom, so I think that it is nice for a lot of people maybe coming up from YA or from other genres, and they see this like kind of nice happy place and they're like, I want to go there too. And it is like, you don't have to know anything, you can just come right in. We're happy to welcome you.
Another thing that I think about too is so many of the rom-coms that I grew up with, I imagine a lot of us grew up with, have not aged perfectly. And I think that a lot of people are drawn to romance and rom-coms right now because I truly believe people who are creating them are writing and producing some of the most inclusive and progressive stories out there. Like, I love Never Been Kissed. It's one of my all-time favorites, but it is hugely problematic in like a really distressing way. Whereas a lot of I would say almost all of the content being produced now is, so progressive and like deeply feminist just at its core, and not the kind of 90s like fake girl power feminism. It's like real true equality, I think.
But that is the power of romance as a genre too, because we are so fast moving. I mean, romance readers themselves are voracious. And so our readers, you all know, they'll read your book the day it comes out and then be like, when is your next one? And you're like, oh God, like I'm already drowning under deadlines. But this is what the genre is. It's full of voracious readers. So because of that, we move fast and we are able to be at the front of some of these big conversations. And so I think that's awesome. We are able to represent the world the way we want it to be, right?
I have to laugh because there was a viral TikTok that said something to the effect of, "Do you like men or do you like the way women write men in romance novels?" Like this is so loud. Like I don't appreciate being read like this, but I was like, it's true, and more men should read them because they really tell you a lot about what women, queer people, all these different audiences want when it comes to their lives. The other thing too, which you all were already getting at, is the fact, I think what's always interesting when I talk to people who are newer to romance is there's almost this bizarre surprise that rom-coms do have serious moments and do have somber moments and can have difficult things or really tragic or sad things happen either in them or characters have experienced them prior to the book's events. So why do you also think that for rom-com specifically it is important to have those darker moments or those more serious moments?
Because that's real life. That's real life. We struggle with things all the time, every day, and we still laugh and we still enjoy life and we still do things that give us happiness. I think that's what makes rom-coms relatable, is when you can read one and you realize like, oh, here's somebody else going through something difficult, but there can still be these moments of joy within those hard times. My books in particular tend to be pretty deep, but I balance them with that humor because, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, right?
And sometimes I think like crying can be funny. Like I think like people think that it has to be either or, but I think of like how Diane Keaton crying in Nancy Meyers movies is like a theme, and it's so funny and relatable. And I think we've all been there. I don't think that there's necessarily like any emotion that you can't make funny. And so I think that's another like potential misconception about romance, is that it can't be like too high heat. I think it's something that people say about romantic comedy books as well. But I think sex can be very funny, and because it's awkward and it brings out things that are embarrassing. And so, yeah, I genuinely think that you can take almost any emotion and add dimension to it and humor to it, as appropriate. Obviously, not every sad moment in a romantic comedy has to have that humor, but I think people think of them as polar opposites when more often than not they can draw together.
I love this question because it makes me think about reviews I've gotten of the X Talk since it came out. And I've been tagged in things that are like, I wasn't expecting this to have depth, which is both a compliment, but also kind of not. And it is just a huge misconception that rom-coms can't touch on difficult topics. And one thing I think a lot about is how romantic comedies really give us this safe space to explore these darker topics. Like the X Talk deals a lot with grief. I had a YA rom-com come out last year that deals a lot with anti-Semitism. And by the end of it that there's going to be a happily ever after, or a happy for now. And I think you just give the reader this cushion and this comfortable place where you can take them into these darker areas, but they know they're going to be safe and cared for by the end of it. And I think there's something really special about that. There's just this trust between the reader and the author when you're dealing with those more difficult topics.
I get a lot of those reviews as well. It is, so I got a masterclass subscription this year because there was a Penn and Teller video and I wanted to learn magic. I didn't get to that yet, but I did listen to the Judd Apatow class on writing, and if you haven't gotten a chance to do it, I'm not always a Judd Apatow fan across the board, but he has a lot of good gems in here. And one of the things that I sort of took away from it was he said at one point that his method of writing is to take something serious, like start with a drama and then make it funny. And I thought, oh, I've never heard such a good articulation of what I do or like what my process is, because I think that there is something just very funny about everyday life, and everyday life can sometimes be hard. And I think actually, the harder it is sometimes, the funnier it can be, or the funnier things you can find in it, because that's how humans cope. I think we find something funny or interesting, and that's what sort of gets you the oomph to get through the thing. So when I talk about rom-coms being relatable, I think that's part of it. I think the part that you can find something funny and lighthearted, and something kind of dramatic and serious that might otherwise be a drama. That's sort of the beauty of this whole genre.
Oh, I love that. I was thinking too, Alisha, like your modern love series perfectly encapsulate this, especially the right square, which is right behind you, of kind of
It's giant right behind me.
it's like, oh, great.
Meteorology wall here.
I love it. And this is actually based on that too. I was wondering for all of you, do you all find it easier to write in your rom-coms the more somber or serious scenes, or do you find it easier to write the more hijinksy comedic scenes, or does it depend on the book? Like, what does that look like for each of you?
Depends on the book for me. Sometimes I go into a scene that's supposed to be really funny and it's just like, oh, I mean, we all have those moments where we're writing a scene and we're just like slogging through it and it's just not, it feels painfully difficult to get it out. And then you have those scenes that just fly out of you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a funny scene or a difficult scene. It's just the scene that you were ready to write in that moment.
Yep.
I don't think any writing is easy.
No.
I think it's all hard for me. So.
Sometimes you get in the zone and you just start to flow with it, but I don't necessarily think those are always funny or always angsty scenes.
Yeah.
It just depends on what we're doing. But
I guess
certainly more fun to write comedy.
Yeah, I would say I'm maybe like more self-conscious about writing comedy than I am about writing sad moments, because I think there's less variability in the way people interpret things. Like humor is so subjective in a way that the sadness doesn't necessarily tend to be. Like, even if you don't connect with something sad on a personal level, you can usually be like, oh, I'm sorry, that sucks. Whereas like sometimes something funny is really like, I will be laughing about it 10 minutes later. My boyfriend's like, please stop. So
And so, okay, we've also kind of dipped into this a little bit, but I definitely wanted to unpack it more, which is what are some of the misconceptions that you hear about rom-coms specifically all the time? We talked about everyone being like, oh, they have serious moments. But yeah, what are some of the other ones that you hear constantly, whether it's just from people who don't read any romance, or people who maybe like really dramatic romance who try a rom-com for the first time, or just maybe just have avoided them for any number of reasons? Yeah, what are some of those major misconceptions?
I'm sure all of you guys see this on your Instagram feeds where people give a review and they start out saying like, this isn't what I usually read, or I had to take a break from my very serious literary reading habit to dip my toe into comedy. And it's almost like they have to explain why they're reading a book that makes them happy. And I sort of want to say, like, do you hear what you're saying? Because you're seeking joy, and then you're feeling the need to defend it a little bit. And so I think, it's sort of what I said before, where it really is okay to enjoy yourself. Like, whatever that like twine wrapped around your happiness, just like snap it away and just be happy. Like, go search those happy stories. I don't understand. But we see a lot of that. I'm sure you guys all do too.
Yeah, I think there's an idea that like rom-coms or romance in general is a guilty pleasure. But there's really nothing, I mean, I don't think there's any sort of thing as a guilty pleasure. I think you should enjoy everything without guilt. But I think especially for something like this where you're like, oh, it makes me feel good, so I got to feel guilty about it. Like, that's not what this genre is about, and it's not what life should be about. So I think that's the thing that always makes me saddest, where it's like, oh, I don't normally do this, but I do this. Because I think there is this idea that it's some sort of like easily written, mass produced, stuff. And it's not easy to write. If it was easy to write, I'd be a lot wealthier.
I wonder how much people feel that way. I wonder how much of it is about it being written predominantly by women, predominantly for women. Because I don't think people apologize when they're out there reading science fiction. I don't think people feel the need to explain why they're reading horror. I do think we have this way of like mocking things that women love a little bit. And
I think it's because it's about emotions, and emotions are traditionally coded as feminine,
Right.
regardless of whatever it is. So whenever it's something that has a strong emotion, you have to be like, oh, well, I don't really enjoy this, but
Right.
I'll make an exception this time. And
Right.
no, unnecessary to do that. So, but I do think, of course, there's an element of some kind of sexism in it.
Yes.
I just want to see someone come on Instagram and be like, it's my 20th John Grisham book of the year. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the misconceptions come from the covers too, especially when we're seeing the rise in these like beautiful, bright illustrated covers, but definitely with the kind of more classic romance covers that a lot of people think of when they think romance. Like when I told people that I was publishing a romance, like everyone who, I mean, maybe not everyone, but like many people were just like, oh, a Fabio book. And I was like, no, there's actually a lot of different kinds of romance now. And but I think that it's like, oh, I'm reading a book with a pink cover, so it's not going to have any depth, and it's going to be, I've even seen things that are like, I was surprised this was well written, which again is another one of those like double-edged compliments.
I think it's also building off of what Rachel was saying about the covers and the traditional pushback to that. I think it was because the clinch covers are desire that's outside of like the cis het male gaze, and that makes people really uncomfortable, mainly cis het men. And I think that's something that's so interesting, is that like people will talk about how sex is pervasive in the culture, but it's like sex through one lens. And I think that does translate into like the romantic comedy ideal, because there's a lot of like raunchy comedy or like sex comedies, like Judd Apatow is like famous for those. And, people will say like, oh, Knocked Up is something that they love, like men will own that as a film. And it's because a lot of the humor in that comes from that singular perspective. And so I think that one of the things I love about the romance genre is its humor and romance and desire through this lens that is not necessarily what's been centered in media traditionally.
I love that.
Amen.
I know. Moment of silence.
Yeah, I feel like too, there's such a debate to be had about like illustrated covers or the traditional covers that we've seen for decades, and kind of and I know as authors, it's kind of a minefield as to what gets what cover nowadays, and all of that very fun stuff. So related to all of your writing, I'd also love to know, both for you all as writers and as readers of rom-coms, do you have a particular rom-com trope or hijinksy thing that you love to write or that you love to read?
I think enemies to lovers is a very easy way to do comedy, because it's easy to be funny when you can be a tiny bit mean, right? And I think that it's setting up that friction of either rivals or frenemies, that kind of thing. It builds in a lot of comedic moments. And so for me, writing that is very fun. But I love reading stories with like the unrequited crush, like the older sibling's best friend. I mean, that is like my crack. I just love it. So if you can make that funny, either through embarrassment or just like, awkward scenarios, that's my favorite. I'm just not as good at writing that, but I love to read it.
I love the forced proximity and the angst. I just read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, and that book just hit so many. It had one bed. It had so much angst, and it was funny. It was witty. There was a lot of comedy, but there was a lot of depth to it. I loved that book. That's like those are my favorite to read.
Yeah, gosh, I feel like you can put forced proximity on top of anything and it instantly just goes up to 11. I definitely love all of those. I am also just really drawn to, it's not one that I've written yet, but like I love Friends to Lovers, and especially, People We Meet on Vacation just does such an amazing job with it. But any I'm just such a sucker for those moments where people are not sure why their feelings are changing for someone. They're like, I'm just staring at him because there's something weird on his face, or like his hair looks kind of odd today. Like, just when the reader and the writer know exactly why the character is doing something, but they don't know it yet, that's just like gold for me.
I'm a sucker for fake dating. Like First Comes Life was such a joy to write because I did get to do a fake dating trope, and it's just like, because whenever there's fake dating, you can always see like a seed in there where you're like, yeah, we have to date for no reason, like it's like like they clearly like each other or whatever, like there's always something in there, and I love to explore that little something, because I think it is hard to force two consenting adults in this day and age together for any length of time if they don't want to be together. So forced proximity or something like that, where they have like kind of an agreement to do it for some other reason that has nothing to do with their feelings, but of course does. Like, that is just my crack.
I like Lessons in Seduction, or like Sex for Science, which I've heard it called, which I also really like. Like, if I can, so far, like 2 for 2 on having like a sex framework in my book, where it's like we're looking at kissing, but for scientific reasons, and we're gonna see how that goes, and we'll let you know our findings. Yeah, if I could just have if I can keep that going, that'll be like a major author goal.
You all are listing some of my favorites, so I'm just sitting here like, yes. And fake dating, I'm always laughing. My co-host and I, Mackenzie and I, were laughing about, okay, but how many people do you know in real life have done fake, like have been in a fake relationship in the way that rom-com sets it up, which is also kind of fun because like, what scenario?
You don't have to drag reality into this.
Yeah, none of that.
Like,
But if they were really good at their fake dating, maybe we don't know. Maybe some of our favorite married couples were faking it in the beginning, and now they're just together.
Maybe they're just so good at it.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
I love that. I'm choosing to believe that every relationship I know started out fake.
Yes.
We're just so convinced. Why not? And enemies to lovers, same thing. It's like, I would like to hate someone in the very specific way that like,
right, exactly.
To like, and not just actually hate them or whatever it might be. Amazing. All right, so are there any books, TV shows, or movies that you all think of as like the gold standard of rom-com in your mind, or like you're like, I wish I had written that book or been the one to think of that movie or what have you?
Clueless for me is so fun. Like, I know it's based on Emma, but I just thought that was such a great retelling. It's so funny. And yeah,
that's one of my favorites. I love Clueless so much. Paul Rudd. Yeah, Schitt's Creek. I know it's not technically a rom-com, but I love every relationship in that show. It was so well done. Like, even just the parents' relationship. I love it. I love it. It's very healthy. There's a lot of healthy relationships in there, and very good dynamics that I think people need to see on TV.
A lot of growth too. And I think one of the things romance could probably stand to do a little bit better, although it's hard because our readers are finicky in this way, which is make our characters a little bit more unlikable to start. Because I think one of the things you see in Schitt's Creek is that they really are not great people at the beginning, but they have it in them, and you see them grow. And it's pretty satisfying.
Yeah, to that end, I loved Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which has a terrible name, but is like a really amazing show. And one thing I remember, the creator was, giving a talk somewhere, and someone asked her, like, how she's so unlikable. Like, why would you create a main character that's so unlikable? And she said, my job isn't to make her likable. It's to make you understand where she's coming from, like why she's doing the things she does. And I thought that was a really good explanation.
That is great.
Because I do think there is something, they don't have to be really likable or perfect in every way, but they can just be people who are deserving of love and get it. So, but yeah, I love Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and also Always Be My Maybe.
I love that movie so much.
I think for a modern rom-com, it is such a, like, if for nothing else than Keanu Reeves being like an exaggerated version of Keanu Reeves for 10 minutes it's a delightful movie, and it really, I think, updates the genre in a lot of ways that we don't, maybe there's not a lot of movies like that for us here.
I love it. I watch that over and over. It just makes me so happy.
The whole thing is so funny.
Long Shot also makes me happy. And you know what? I did not expect that to work for me because she is so beautiful and he is so Seth Rogen. And like, I was like, in no scenario would you put a similarly homely woman, but he owns it and he's so funny. And the scene where he falls down the stairs at the party, I was like, you know, like in the, when you like see the, like the VCR tape, like rewinding so you can watch it over and over. That was me. I like could not stop watching that. Anyway, that's a really cute movie too. And laugh out loud funny.
I definitely agree with all of those. And I would also add You've Got Mail, which to me is just the classic romance rom-com setup. And obviously, I mean, even that was not original. It was borrowed from an older movie, but like that premise has been recycled and just rejuvenated so many times. But I mean, just Nora Ephron's writing and banter, it's just, I mean, gold. Yeah, like I rewatched it recently and it holds up. It's just still so fun and so lovely. And yeah, I feel like you just can't get much better than Nora Ephron.
Very true.
Can I say one thing though? Because we've all mentioned movies and we're not mentioning books, which is what we do. And one thing that's I think is actually funny, I was thinking about this before the panel, that the movie The Proposal is very funny. There are some scenes in it that I would definitely not have in it in this day and age. But it's a really funny movie, but I don't know if you guys have ever read the screenplay, and the screenplay is fine. It's just not as funny. And Ryan Reynolds and Sandra Bullock really brought humor to that movie. But we don't have that shortcut of actors, right? There's a lot of things that you can do in movies that you can't do in books. Like all of our humor has to be on the page. And so I just want to say to all the women on this panel, like you guys all do that so amazingly. And that's really hard to do that without somebody acting out the hijinks. So I just want to pat you guys on the back and say good job, because I think writing comedy only on the page is much harder.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah. I feel like it's easier to imagine certain books as movies or TV shows than it is to be like, how would this movie be a book? You know, sometimes you read the book and you're like, oh, it's a different vibe than whatever the movie or TV show ended up being. Just because, books are just different.
And some other funny books would be like You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel. That one's really funny. Everybody's read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, but it's hilarious. And then Tessa Dare is really good at comedy and historical romance. So those are some. Rebecca Weatherspoon, she's just hilarious always. So she's very good at infusing humor into situations too.
I was thinking about this too, because I think you're absolutely right about how difficult it is to get hijinks across in the right way. And you're also like kind of leaving a lot of like up to the reader to kind of be generous in their delivery in their head of how those lines go. So I was trying to think of like other romance books that have inspired me. And I think this is one, maybe, I don't know if a ton of people have read this, but Stephanie Bond has a novella called Irresistible that is full of hijinks, and it came out, I believe, in the 90s. So there might be some things that didn't age perfectly, but it was one of those books that was really formative for me. So if anyone's looking for one that they maybe haven't tried, you can give that one a go, because I think it fits that brief of like learning how to put comedy we traditionally associate with movies on the page in a romance novel.
I would add to that, like Shelley Lawrenson / G.A. Aiken was one of my formative reads, and I think, you know, her snappy dialogue is without compare. Like I laugh just at the things they say, and you can see it in your head, even though they're usually either fantasy or, you know, urban fantasy. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, good point, Lauren. There's a lot of heavy lifting we have to do without the advantage of actors.
Amazing. And so to just wrap things up here, I just want to give you all the floor one more time to, I know a bunch of you either have books that are about to come out or just came out. So if everyone just wants to say, you know, either what just came out or what's coming out, and if anyone also wants to plug anything that they are working on currently, where to find you all on social media, all of that good stuff. Yeah, would just love for everyone to know where to buy your books and where to find you.
Alisha, why don't you start?
I had a book come out last week. It's called First Comes Like. It is about an influencer who's been getting DMs from this very famous Bollywood actor, and he comes to America and he's kind of shady about meeting up. So she just decides to go and corner him at a party. And he has no idea who she is. So somebody's been using his account to catfish her. And, nonetheless, hijinks ensue, and they decide to hatch a fake dating plot after a paparazzi catches them together. And there's a lot of gossip, and they both kind of have their own reasons for doing it. And who's to say? Maybe it'll end happily. So that's First Comes Like. It was out last week. You can pick up a copy anywhere you get books.
I loved it.
Oh,
Your TikTok for it was so great.
oh, thanks.
We have the Soulmate Equation out May 18th. I forgot to grab a copy off my shelf, so it's over there and you can't see it. And it is a story of a single mom, Jess, and she's very kind of averse to dating. She wants to focus on her job and her daughter, and her best friend, who is a romance author, it drags her to sort of an orientation at this new company that's setting up a DNA matchmaking service, and she doesn't want to do it. She thinks it sounds a little sketchy. She's a little like not into the eugenics vibe, and they're like, no, that's not what we're doing here. And she ends up taking the test, and turns out she matches with the founder of the company, who she does not like. So the company pays her a good amount of money to go and see if she can just enjoy his company, and she really needs it. So we have fake dating. We have soulmates, meant to be, little enemies to lovers sprinkled in, our first single mom. So it was really fun to write.
It's so good. I finished it a couple weeks ago and I cannot stop thinking about it. So the X Talk is out right now, romantic comedy set in the world of public radio. And I just announced what will be my next adult rom-com coming next year. It is called Weather Girl, and it is about a TV meteorologist and a sports reporter who scheme to reunite their divorced bosses who are making work just completely hellish for everyone. So it sort of has some Set It Up vibes, and that's what I'm working on right now.
That sounds awesome. I'm excited
you.
for that.
I'll continue the chain of saying you loved the last author's book, because the X Talk is phenomenal and has a gritty reference, which as a native Philadelphia person speaks to my soul.
Thank you.
The Roommate, again, is out now, and The Intimacy Experiment, which follows the not jealous ex-girlfriend from that book, comes out on April 6th. It is a former sex worker turned startup CEO and a hot rabbi. So we've been through the generation of the hot priest, and I'm trying to usher in the generation of the hot rabbi. And they get together to write a syllabus for a modern intimacy course, like really examining what love and connection look like today through their very unique set of experiences. And as they're writing this syllabus, like I said, for science, they think maybe they'll test it and end up realizing that even when you think you know a lot about love, you still have a lot to learn.
It's so good.
I'm going to continue with the I read your last book trend as well, because Rosie, your book was actually the last book I read. And it was so good. A blogger like hopped into my DMs and was like, I know this is really weird and random, but I really think you'd like this book. And so I got it like instantly and listened to it on audiobook, and it was so good. So good. I have to write my review for that actually. My next book is Life's Too Short, and it's out April 6th. And it is about a inspirational, famous YouTuber named Vanessa Price. And she's inspirational and famous because she has, in her family, ALS runs in her family. So she has a 50% chance of having inherited the gene that causes ALS, which as we know is fatal. So she's lived her whole life basically not knowing whether or not she's got another year to live. And she meets her very stuffy next door neighbor, Adrian Copeland, and he is a lawyer, and he's very much like a workaholic. The guy never takes vacations, and she's very much live for the day because she has no other choice but to be that way. And it is a very slow burn, friends to lovers, and it is deep, and it is beautiful, and it is funny, and it is sad. And I hope you pick it up because it's out April 6th. And it feels it's like the read that you need for the pandemic, because they're very much trapped in their apartments somewhat, because Vanessa has gotten custody of her sister's newborn baby. So she's kind of like tied down from her international travels, as we all are right now. So it's a very good pandemic read, and it's got a very good message as well.
I love it. Well, thank you so much to all of you. This was phenomenal. Everything you said, I was sitting here clapping, snapping, and wanting to cheer. But yeah, thank you so much. And I think that wraps us up.
Yay. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.